Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm inviting all of us to get settled. So nice to see you. Good morning. My name is Sizakele. Most people call me Za, so you also can call me Za. I heard a phrase yesterday about FOD, so I guess I'm also an FOD. So ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the second day of Africa and the World 2023. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. I actually don't have to because her bio is longer than my arm. So she did ask me to be brief, and I said to her I would do justice because if I didn't at least tell you of her work, my mother would come for me. So I think I'm allowed to say that we all know of her work inside and outside of government and how she continues with every effort to move the human family forward. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka to the stage.
Thank you very much, sir. And good morning. Dear Dele, I'm also an FOD. And it is wonderful to rub shoulders with Dele because by association, I get to be here with you. I am truly honored to be in your midst. I'd also like to welcome you to South Africa and hope you enjoy our country, and to Stellenbosch, which is truly a beautiful part of the country. It looks like the weather is working with us today, so I hope you can enjoy Stellenbosch. I have heard that there's a Chinese saying that says, may we live in interesting times. And I think this is what describes Africa in the world today. We are living in interesting times, to the extent that this is supposed to mean that may you live in a time where there are challenges, but also possibilities. But the real focus for us, I hope, can be on the possibilities. I have been asked to make a few remarks about education in South Africa and on the continent, and I'm looking forward to join David and our wonderful moderator in a discussion on this subject of education. We have a myriad of challenges in education. We also have opportunities, but it is tricky because if we don't act fast and appropriately, the risks are very high. We all know that we could face significant hardships if our education systems collapse on us. I am a teacher, so this is a subject that I'm passionate about. If you strip me of all the other pretenses, this is all I am, is a teacher. Education has been an important intervention in all our countries to reduce poverty, in some cases to help us with inequality, even in some cases to help us address a complex issue such as gender inequality. But also education remains very important for our developmental projects globally and our aspirations everywhere, including our continent, in support of our vision for prosperity. I think many of us in this room today went to public schools, I'm suspecting. And we are also self-educated. And a few of us maybe managed to go to good universities. So we are a mixture of things. Our education was specific for that time. That does not exist anymore. But our education has not changed to fit the time that we are in. And I guess that is my first point. Something big has to happen to ensure that our education is relevant. The education that I received, together with many other people of my time, many fell by the wayside. Many did get education and are not able to use it because even though it helped many of us, it was also irrelevant in many other cases. So there were people who had certificates but really could not do anything. It is therefore important that in the changes that we have to think about, the changes that we have to drive, maintaining a bigger picture, we truly think about overhauling education. It has to be radical. And by radical, I don't mean right or left, because I don't think radical has always to mean that, but drastic in what it has to bring about. In South Africa and in Africa, many of our children get education, and actually, education is just a trip to nowhere. And to the extent that we have so many young people as Africa, we are a continent that could be a supplier of labor if we are able to put all our ducks in a row. We just cannot afford to be sending people to institutions that takes them to nowhere. So the issue of population, when we speak about education in Africa, is quite critical. In the case of South Africa, 22 million of our population is under 19 years old, in a population of 60 million plus. A challenging figure, but actually not impossible if I'm speaking in the presence of Nigeria, for instance. I think when I heard yesterday that Nigeria had 22 million teachers, was it 22 million? Or thousands? Thousands? Okay, a lot. But really, if we have a population of 22 million under the ages of 19, that is a schooling population that we have to plan for and plan for decisively. If I just take the issue of reading, writing, and counting, in South Africa and on the continent, we have a crisis because our children reach grade 4 without capacity to read and write and count, and to read for meaning in any language. Children who speak isiXhosa unable to read a story in Xhosa. Children who are Zulu speaking, unable to read a story in Zulu, never mind English. But this is also the crisis we're facing on the continent. On average, children who are illiterate in schools are above 70%. We therefore do not have this population we need to be preparing for the future. If children get through grade 1 and 2 without having learned the alphabet properly, their career is over. Can you imagine your career and your future is over at grade 2? Because in many cases as teachers, we don't necessarily know that, and therefore we don't have interventions along the way to help these children come back. We have in South Africa a population between 15 and 35 years old of 24.4 million. That is 63.3%. That is where we have a population that is out of school and out of work. That is the population that does not just need education, that needs skills that they can use now. Because there's many things that need to be fixed in our country, which requires the skills that these young people can have. The challenge, I think, for us is that this is our timing bomb. These are the young people that are restless and need something to do and something to live on. In many countries with this same population, these are the young people who fight for the leaders of the country, for the wars they don't even understand. When I was negotiating the peace agreement for Ethiopia, it was striking to me that the delegation on the Ethiopian side and on the Tigray People's Liberation Army that we were trying to bring together was all old men. No women, no youth. Women are the people who are most likely to die in a war, even if they are not in combat. It is more dangerous to be a woman and a child in a war zone. Youth are the ones who die because they are sent there to fight, and to fight a war that has nothing to do with them. And when peace is being discussed, you don't see them anywhere. But if young people are not being sent to war, they will start a war against the state. So either way, by not capacitating young people, we are really playing with fire. Let me quickly say, it's important to capacitate teachers in an education system because they are the best resource ever in education. An education system is a reflection of the teachers. If the education system fails, it is a reflection of the capacity or lack of the teachers in that system. In Africa, we have a semblance of a public education system. So we have a backbone, we have something. We can start from somewhere to strengthen what we already have and make it work. The risk of, if I may use the South African term, of load shedding our children, if we do not fix this backbone of the education system, is very high. And lastly, I see my time is running up. The changes that technology is bringing to us and to the education system, we have to look at the advantages and disadvantages of the technology that is upon us, because technology can assist us to drive changes that is beyond what we could ever imagine. But also technology is a divider, because those who have it can gallop and leave all of us behind. It's important for governments to think of technology as a right that every child must have, and to allocate resources equitably so that those who have the least have most money in order for them to stand up and to catch up. We have an opportunity in the world today to have universal education. The technology makes that possible, but putting all the measures together is what we need to do. In our country, there has been efforts to take our education system and to make the changes required. But we have been challenged by poor leadership that makes mediocrity acceptable. We have been challenged by corruption that has eroded many of the benefits that this education should bring to us. But I don't think everything is gone. There's still something that we can do and must do, and I look forward to the discussion so that we can learn how we could get out of this rather concerning situation. Thank you.
Please help me give Dr. Phumzile another round of applause. Thank you. I'd like to now invite Dr. John Dize, the president of the Bezos Foundation, and also someone who has a background in education because he was the former superintendent of Los Angeles Public Schools, to come and share a few remarks with us, and then we'll dive into the conversation. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's actually an honor to be here. I am... No, I'm going to introduce him in a moment. I am not Arturo. But I'm still glad to be here, even though I'm not Arturo. And thrilled to be here. I'm a charter member of the stateside chapter of the Friends of Delhi, and very much a brother. I'm really proud to be here and to be in South Africa. It's probably the country I have studied more than the United States in terms of my whole life, and it's been amazing to be here. First of all, I'm not speaking as a representative of the United States on education or a member and the president of the Bezos Foundation, but someone for 45 years who worked in public education in the States, including leading Los Angeles Unified, which is our nation's second largest city. We had about 900,000 students when we were there, around that. And I assure you, with this Boston accent, I am speaking English. And you will get a transcript if you cannot understand what I am saying. I'm going to talk about the interplay of government and philanthropy and the private sector, and how that has conspired positively for catalytic changes and the warning when they step away from that. And so a very, very brief history, a little bit to set the table for us. You know, I think it's fair to say that in the United States, education has been a high factor since the first settlers came fleeing Europe and persecution to the United States and providing that for all students. There's been many accolades and accomplishments in U.S. history and education that are directly attributed to the quality of our education and our research institutions. And yet we have been slow and at times have made no progress in solving the vexing problems of poverty, inequality, equity, and the opportunity for all to have this thing we call the American dream. Yet, one could confidently say that there has been genuine progress until recently. So the very first schools in the US, 1635, my hometown of Boston, Boston Latin, the oldest existing high school in the United States and arguably one of the best and most revered, has produced amazing graduates like Benjamin Franklin and Ralph Waldo Emerson and Leonard Bernstein. And within 5 years of that, in the colonies, it was agreed that if you had a town, you had to build a school for young people. Year after that, the first universities were built, started with Harvard, then rapidly Yale, Brown, William and Mary. And pretty much through the colonial period, education was found in all of the colonies. The southern colonies, mostly by religious, as opposed to the northern colonies. Yet one must be very aware, as we are, of the horrific practice of chattel slavery and segregation. And if you were a black youth, and if you went to school even in the North, you lived in very segregated opportunities. We know that enslaved children and parents of enslaved children were forbidden to allow anybody to learn to read, punishable by death. But at the same time, we even opened our first medical school before our revolution in 1765 in Philadelphia. So by the end of the American Revolution, the first seminal decisions were made in the US that it was mandatory to go to school, and that it would be free, and it was paid for by the taxation of property. By the end of the Civil War and during Reconstruction, we did our best to generally educate all students, albeit in segregation. So from the Jim Crow era on, one of the things that really is something that we have continued to try to work with and try to overcome was the issue of segregation in public education. And nothing more haunting than the US Supreme Court decision of Plessy versus Ferguson, which set the policy of separate but equal for more than 100 years. And that was the doctrine of public life and the doctrine of public schools. We've struggled greatly to educate our children, college as well, and we have made progress. I'll talk a little bit about now the role of government in accelerating that progress. About the turn of the 19th century, 1900, 1920, began the progressive era. And that was fundamentally as a result of universities. So we had folks like John Dewey, who basically formed the fact that we needed public school buildings that were of good quality, a curriculum for every high school student, separate elementary students, and a profession of teachers that had to be credentialed and invested in. It had a huge effect upon the United States generally from that point forward. I think the second major event for us was after World War II. We called it the GI Bill. And government said at that point that anybody who fought in World War II and came back to the United States would have a free college education. It's hard to underestimate the effect that that had on our economy and had on the face of the United States for the next 50 years. Except for the fact that while everyone was guaranteed an education, most black soldiers could not actually get into university to take care of that. But it is without doubt the Supreme Court decision in 1954, which is Brown versus the Board of Education, which ended more than 100 years of separate but equal. And when that decision was handed down in June of 1954, and I quote, that we would desegregate all schools in the United States with all due haste. It is 2023, and we are still struggling to live up to that. The failure and the legacy of not living up to Brown actually had a very personal effect on me. Witnessing the forced busing programs of Boston and watching it unfold in what was really the most violent of all of deseg attempts in the United States had a huge impact on me. It was unfathomable for me to try to understand this. I simply couldn't understand why moms would lay down in front of a bus and choose to be run over, then allow a black student to go to that high school. Or why dads would take a baseball bat to bus drivers rather than have them unload black children in a public high school. Or watching a white man stab a black man at a school board meeting with an American flag rather than allowing that. Yet, we continued to persevere. I think the next set of tremendous changes came about by government in 1964-65 with what we called the Great Society. There we said every student who goes to school who's in poverty will have free lunch. We brought medical conditions into the schools for hearing and for dental. We invested tremendously in teachers, and for the first time, the government gave much more money to schools that educated students who lived in circumstances of poverty to try to build reading. These had big effects in the United States, without a doubt. The reforms that came about in the 80s and 90s after our famous report of A Nation at Risk, which basically began with the paragraph that if a foreign country was doing to the US education system what we are doing in terms of quality, we would have declared it an act of war. That spurred a whole series of reforms led, in that case, by the government. Came around in terms of opportunities for changes in curriculum, changes in opportunities for schools like charter schools. But really since 1980 is when we began to take a very serious approach that was not just government. It was the beginning of two other sectors entering and saying, this is just not okay. We will never get where we need to be as a country. And then entered the notion of the private sector and entered the opportunities of philanthropy. I personally was very involved in this period of time and witnessed much change. During this period of time, we saw huge increases in all measures nationally, whether they were achievement outcomes, and that was across the board, regardless of race or ethnicity or language or special needs or conditions of poverty. Graduation rates went to their highest levels. College acceptance rates were at their highest levels. Achievement rates across this were at their highest levels. From 2000 to 2015 was probably the most transformational period, and a period that I was deeply involved in. It began in the cities of New York and Los Angeles, where I was leading, and Chicago, where we were a group of leaders who worked very closely with the rising power of philanthropy and the private sector to really dramatically change schools around the issue of equity versus equality. That no matter what your circumstance, you would have access to a very high quality education. And we rapidly began this opportunity. I, for one, approached this in ways that we thought about, yes, I will affect my system, but also my state, which was California, and the nation. And our theory of action was that a student's rights were very, very, very special. The system had really been made for adults, both their comfort and their rights. And we wanted to turn that upside down. So if you have something fragile, you put it in a box to keep it safe. And the four sides of the box for us were regulation and negotiation and legislation and litigation. And we pushed on all four at the same time. And I'll give you just four examples. One was the issue of regulation. We wanted every single student to have what we called the college-going curriculum. And at that point, some students got orange juice and some students got orange drink. Totally inappropriate. And so in order to do that, I needed to change the laws of the school system I was in with my school board. But it was the support of philanthropy and local nonprofits that on the day of our vote, they closed the largest highway system in all of Los Angeles. And we closed it by placing 1,000 empty desks on the 101 and shut down the city so that actually the only focus could be, are you going to give young people the right to a high curriculum? It was a fascinating interchange around that. Next came the opportunity for legislation. We wanted funding to be dramatically different. We wanted the schools of greatest poverty to have the greatest amount of money. So, the public sector began to pressure the politicians. If you want money to get reelected, you will change the funding system. And it did. And it became a fascinating opportunity for a true distribution of wealth where those who had the least actually got the most. Negotiation, if you know anything about the US, labor unions are king. And we negotiated very different contracts. And in order to do that, we needed the private sector to apply pressure to the politicians to change our contracts so that must-place teachers, these are teachers that no one would hire before that, they had to be placed in a classroom. That practice ended around that. Very controversial. But I think the last one was the power of philanthropy in giving us and funding new models of schools and the power of the private sector in backing litigation. And so a series of rather famous lawsuits emerged. We wanted things to change. I couldn't get them to change by regulation. I couldn't get them to change by legislation or negotiation. So groups of parents and students would sue me, and then we would go to court, and then you testify to the truth, which is what we wanted to have happen, and the judge would change the laws of the state of California in very profound ways. That was not well liked by some individuals, but it had a profound effect at changing the opportunities for young people around that. These required courage and opportunity, and it was quite a remarkable time when I look back on it. That and many other opportunities simply could not have happened without this interplay. Of course, what government had done, which regulates well, but the innovation possibilities of the private sector and philanthropy. It brings me to today, or should I say about the last 6 years. Every single indicator I just proudly talked about has headed in a very different direction, and not a positive one. By almost any measure, student achievement, access, and opportunity have dramatically changed course and declined in the United States. And this is not just about the pandemic. This was happening before that. The pandemic laid bare the inequalities that were there. What was interesting, though, is that it was also a time when the private sector and philanthropy pulled away. It was getting a little too difficult, just a little too public and being challenged. What we saw, however, we're not going to debate the reasons for this, but nationwide, we saw a dramatic decline. We now see that teachers and administrators are leaving the profession in record numbers. Funding has decreased for youth in the greatest forms of peril. Books are being banned on a large scale. Curriculum is being altered by law. And in nearly every discipline, we now omit, edit, or outright ban the teaching of whole segments of our history. As a matter of fact, there is now law in some states where one must teach that slavery actually benefited the enslaved because they, quote, learned skills. It's very hard to have watched this take place. Teachers can be jailed for teaching the wrong things or making the wrong statements. And at one point, what we call the College Board courses, where the gold standard, are actually being prohibited from being taught in some places. I close my comments by not ascribing motive or blame or even a theory about this inflection point, but rather to engage in civil discourse and dialogue as we sit close to difference and try to find a way forward. You know, I received my education. I benefited. I was a very, very lucky person. Didn't come from means, but had the opportunities. I want it to be for every student. And in my fear is this very notion of the American experiment, this republic, it only works with an educated citizenry. And if we do not guard that as carefully, we are going to be in trouble. I also do it selfishly. I'm going to get old, unfortunately, sooner rather than later in my life at the moment. And the person who changes the signals on the subway in New York when I want to go to a play, or runs air traffic control in LA when I want to visit my grandchildren, or will take care of me in a hospital, I want those people to know what they're doing. And to contribute to the safety net we have built in America around this issue of Social Security. I want to learn from each other. I have learned of the tribe in this continent of the Maasai, whose daily greeting in English roughly translates to is, "How are the children today?" I want to be able to say they're fine, because they're counting on us in any country. So thank you very much, and look forward to a discussion.
Thank you very much for that rapid education on the American educational system and the fact that it is facing some troubles as well, it would seem. Now, in thinking through this conversation, obviously, Africa is complex, it's large. And therefore, what you find is the problems that South African education is facing might be slightly different from what we have in Nigeria, where, for example, we have uneducated people, unskilled, high unemployment. South Africa, maybe a degree of literacy, but high unemployment as well. And you raised some of the issues, you know, when you started talking about the appropriateness of the education that we have. But it seems to me that across the continent, there are three things we need to solve for, regardless of what the context is. The first is that appropriateness, like deciding how do we solve for the kind of education that we should be getting? How do we answer the question on what we should be teaching our children? The second is that of access. How do we ensure equity in terms of who gets educated? And the third issue is of affordability, because increasingly on the continent, education has become really, really expensive. And as that expense has gone up, we've seen quality deteriorate. And so these are the sort of three things that if I could get the two of you to sort of talk us through, how do we solve for those three key issues? Maybe starting with you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with those three things. And those three things have got answers. I really believe that it is what we are going to do about them and how radical we are going to do it. I mean, I remember a time here in South Africa when the government and the party, the governing party, was, and I think still is, it's just struggling, but it's a part of big ideas. Because for many of the problems we have, there are no smaller nyana interventions that you can make. You really have to take on the issue of access, for instance, in a wholesale, so that you can make sure that a child in every part of the country can have access to education. And that is why, for instance, in that case, I would say, how far do you drive technology in order to make sure that there is access and it is quick? Because for a child who misses what they should be getting when they are 9, they will not stand at that age until you fix things. They are growing, and by the time you come with a solution, it's irrelevant to them. So the pace at which we deliver change is actually quite important.
John, I mean, again, we talk about doing these things, but the issue of the funding, the affordability, where do we find the resources, given where we are?
It's a very interesting question. So I think generally in our history, access has been handled by the courts. So the courts have decided that it will be universal access. Funding has been handled by the legislatures. And if we've learned anything, is that it is not a matter of finding the funding. The resources exist. It's the courage and conviction about how you want to distribute them. Do we want to invest in the most precious resource of a country, which is its youth, and invest greatly so that they have this opportunity which we enjoy ourselves? So that's more of courage and conviction. And I would say the third piece to this is who ensures and puts the pressure that the answer is that we don't go backwards in the courts and we demand the funding. That has been parents. And that has been the deep investment about building the agency of parents to demand and make sure that we are assured in delivering that. That three-piece has been really fascinating. I really do believe it is not finding the resources, it's how you're going to distribute them.
Yeah, but the problem on the continent, of course, is that often parents themselves are not in a position to demand anything. They're barely eking out a living. Many of them are not actually educated, so may not even understand the power of education. And I know this seems like a little bit of a circular argument, but I just wonder in sort of practical terms. I'm trying to see if, you know, from your experience of working in the sort of public school systems, whether there are sort of things people can do within the context of being in a continent where the problems are actually huge. So if you look at the disparities, a place like Somalia, we're looking at something like under 40% literacy rate. In my state, and our governor is here, we have an illiteracy rate of something like 90%. I mean, how does a state with a 90% illiteracy rate begin to advocate? How do parents from that kind of place, right? So, yeah.
So we'll give an example. So in Los Angeles, 70% of the parents do not speak English as a first language, and more than 80% live in a circumstance of poverty. It was philanthropy that invested in those parents understanding what they and their children should have. It really wasn't government, and helped build their capacity to demand this. That's why I am so keen on this notion that these three sectors really need to come together if we want that to happen for young people.
But also, I think for parents who do not have the kind of education and insights that would allow them to drive change, I would say that in our context in Africa, civil society would be critical to take the message to society. I mean, I just think about children and reading. There are children in South Africa who live in families where no one ever reads. They've never seen their parent read a newspaper or a Bible or a Quran. I even say to parents sometimes, even if you can't read, just hold the newspaper and pretend you are reading. Child won't know that you can't read. It's important for them to understand that reading is a thing you do. But civil society, with a little bit of sophistication that they have, can actually drive the change and the message much further. And luckily, we have civil society all over the country. I mean, there was a time in South Africa where we were managing to bring parents into understanding how the education system works. But I think now we have a majority of children who are born of children. So there is even a change of the composition of who is a parent. Government invested a lot of time at the time when we were building, after 1994, the education system to try and bring parents and to really deal with education as a communal issue, a communal endeavor. But this change that we have now is another challenge of having parents that are children, are themselves illiterate, by the way. So it makes it more complicated.
Okay, so in terms of, does Africa need to sort of, because you were talking about radical change, do we need to sort of rethink our sort of philosophy of, what's sort of the framework for our education? I guess the question I'm asking is, he talked about public education, and then we've got, like, across the continent, we've got public education, we've got private education, we've got philanthropy, sometimes charities, religious bodies doing education. There are places in the world like Finland where education is 100% paid for by government. And sometimes there's that ideological, pull between whether, education should be a myriad of different people at different points, or whether that then leads to, if you like, tiers of education. What are your thoughts regarding this for the continent?
I think on the continent, we should not stop private education. I don't think that the parents who can afford private education would accept to be denied of that private education, especially because our public education is not that good. But ultimately, public education is our responsibility. That is where the majority of the children go through. So our focus and our resources has to go towards fixing public education. I'm not so sure how much expenditure goes to public education in most countries, but in South Africa, we do focus on public education, but it's just how we spend the money that is a problem. We spend a lot of money to get crap results. Something has to give in what happens once we've made the money available. We end up, for instance, in many cases with children who still in schools that you'd not wish to send most of your children. But for me, I can see everything, infrastructure, etc. But teachers, really teachers have to be quality, because even if a child is under a tree, with a good teacher, that child can still make it.
Okay, so let me, let me push you a little bit on this issue of, because you talked about the budgeting and all of that. At what point in the educational system does education cease to be a social investment versus a private investment? So in other words, does government fund education only sort of at the sort of very basic foundational primary level, or up to sort of, you know, what we call secondary school, and then do you sort of then say tertiary education is a private investment? Again, because affordability continues to be an issue.
In our case, education is funded from the very beginning up to the end, up to university.
And is that realistic?
I don't think it's sustainable. But at the same time, I think it was good that government pushed in that direction, because just too many children would not have been able to go to school. I'm a chancellor at a University of Johannesburg. About 60% of our students get government funding. And most of them are would be first-time graduates in their families. So this is how much basic and important education is. So in some ways, there's just so much that the government has tried to do to bring our education. But because of the leadership chaos, I would say, not enough people who are really paying attention and making sure that there are not too many moving parts. Really good ideas have not given us the results they were intended to give us. So I think it's where we have to, something that we have to go back to and really fix to connect the dots properly.
So I really loved your comments and your response to this notion of what is the paradigm that we're hoping for. I want to make the case that when a state or a country believes that its most important natural resource isn't, you know, cobalt, or it's not lithium, or it's not gold, but it's youth, I think that paradigm is incredibly important. One of the things I failed at trying to have as a law, and friends in the US will laugh at this, but it was very important to me, was that if every legislator or governor was required to have their own child in public school, you would have a dramatically different thing overnight. That goes along with your value on a young person. So yes, that is the framework you were talking about. I still hold hope, and I love your challenge that it is society and government's responsibility up through the beginning of university to pay for high quality education for every single person.
Okay. So, John, let me just take you and sort of be quite specific. I'm sorry if I'm being a little bit, but I'm from the northern part of Nigeria, and education there right now is pretty abysmal, right? And how do we solve for education in terms of access, affordability, and all the things that we discussed in conflict areas? A large chunk of the Sahel, now, you know, wars, military have taken over. In the north, some schools have been shut for over a year because, you know, people go into schools and abduct children. Are there sort of innovative ways in which, because we recognize we must educate the kids, particularly if we're to stand a chance of getting out of that circle of conflict and violence? So how do we solve for that based on your sort of 40 years of experience of dealing with this education?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question in this circumstance. I pray for the young people in northern Nigeria, but I think I could offer a thought, and that is, in the U.S., although nothing like what you're saying, but in the areas where we saw kind of unbelievable gang violence, where, you know, students are shot and killed every single day, going to school, adults. One of the things that emerged that was a real hope was the rise of charter schools. These were public schools that were publicly funded, but not run by government. And they had opportunities by given certain freedoms where, and it wasn't, you didn't go into those schools by taking a test. It was random lottery. The results in the most difficult areas generally outperformed the regular public schools. So giving opportunity to innovate schools, both for safety and for opportunity, I think might be one opportunity for that. I think a second opportunity is, it's controversial, but it is to invite the private sector to partner in lifting up models of schools. I don't think the same things would happen in factories as they would. You wouldn't shutter a factory for a year around that.
In some places it has happened, attacks have led
But this
to that.
partnership is a possibility.
Okay, a final question before I open it up to the audience, because we have just about 10 minutes. You referred very briefly to tech when you were talking. And the question is there a possibility of how do we use tech on the continent to solve for these issues of access, affordability, and, you know, appropriateness of education?
Well, in the first place, I think we have to have a relationship with the companies that provide technology on the continent. And it is actually beneficiary to them to take our problem serious, because we create a very large market that they can use. But before we can be users in every village, you have to invest in the uptake of technology. And I think sometimes private sector can be short-sighted, where they are not willing to invest in the first steps so that they can enjoy what happens afterwards. I think that our governments have to be determined and come together at an AU level to really engage with private sector about the bringing of education through technology on the continent.
So you think we need a continent-wide approach around policy and a few other...
At least they have to speak with one voice. They have to engage these companies together for impact and for effect. And we also have to make sure that governments are willing to use their own resources to have the infrastructure that is required so that countries are connected. I think technology is now as important as water. It is a human right. I was in a meeting where Pope Francis wanted us to reflect about making technology a human right. And I was looking at him and saying, you know, if an old man who's a godly type person is worried about technology in this manner, why are we not getting that in our governments, the people who are responsible for our lives? We have to make sure that we think about the poorest first, because of all the problems we have of fighting poverty. If we can just give and deliver education to the poorest of the poor, half of their problems are solved. Nice thing about education, once someone has got it, no one can take it away from them. And it just gives them options for them to navigate through life. They don't always succeed. You know how many educated people don't make it, but it at least gives them a fighting chance.
John, one take.
I'm speaking purely for myself, and that is, I think getting rid of the fear of the concentration of power in the few, and allowing that actually to benefit the totality, which are our young people. That is a mind shift that is incredibly important. We know how we can do this. This is not difficult to give access to technology, but it's a decision. And I think it's a decision that I totally agree with you about. It will be transformational. And I would argue that it very well may be a conversation around power and privilege rather than technology.
Thank you very much. I'll take a few questions from the audience. Okay, so if we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a minute each, because that's all we can do. And then I think if you just take notes so that we take all the questions, maybe the first 3 or 4, and come back to you to save time. Where are the mics? Or should I come down? I can come down. Yeah. There you go.
Good morning. How do we align the reality of what needs to be done with political and electoral incentives? There's a reason why governors, for example, in Nigeria would default to building bigger schools, mega schools, because at the end of 4 years, you need to show what you've done. The harder work, actually, long-term work, there's really no political incentive for that. So how do we factor that into these conversations about education? Thank you.
Hi. The brother from Boston, my brother from Boston. I'm actually assailed and impaled by the same anxiety you telegraphed as you closed about the future in the United States. Safe to say that as a South African, that crisis is already upon us. We actually have bad dudes at the helm of our state, which is why things are just going awry all around us. Now, a question for you, Mam Lambo. The Statistician General, the former Statistician General, has mapped, if you like, the crisis of our educational drift from the 1950s when band education was introduced. And it shows the gradual decline, in terms of the educational outcomes amongst the races. But what it shows is that that divide has opened widest in the democratic dispensation. We are the democratic dispensation. The new South Africa is poorly educating our children. We are, as a result, producing an undereducated, alienated populace, which is a tinder for a social explosion. The kind of things that you're talking about, that when these kids who are poorly educated are not deployed in interstate warfare, these kids are going to rise against the democratic dispensation. Already, when we have...
So we do need you to please hurry up.
Pardon?
Well, yeah, we do need you to wrap up. Okay. There are a lot of people waiting to speak.
So I'm just saying, how do we make this crisis an obsession with those who are decision makers? Because it is a challenge to our future. It is a challenge to our present.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your brilliant remarks. I have a chicken and the egg question. Most societies devalue females compared to males. If there's a shortage of funds, they will pay for the boys to go to school, not the girls. Once the girls reach high school age, they will not get hygiene products, and that will keep them from going to school for at least a full week every month. And once they realize they don't have money to buy a cell phone and so on, they'll look for sugar daddies, and pretty soon they're a pregnant teenager. And so you repeat this cycle of children raising children, and you never break the problem of the role of the female and the duty to the family to equally raise both genders. How do you conquer that?
Actually, you could take the ones we have now, and then we'll come back and do the last set. could you deal with the questions raised, please? Yeah? Thank you.
I'll start in reverse order. I personally believe that is where men have and must stand up for the rights of women. And that if that is the case, then, as you said, that cycle will be broken by the courage of men to stand up and say, no, that ends. And I just believe that deeply in my heart around that.
Yeah, I mean, I also want to start with this gender thing. I think that is a societal issue. And in fact, this issue of gender is a men's issue. Beneficiaries of patriarchy have to be in the forefront of making sure that patriarchy collapses. No, because it is much harder for women as victims of patriarchy to be the ones who have to conquer patriarchy. I think good men is what needs to be really front and center of the fight against gender equality. And I also think that if we are able to find a way, which when I worked my last job as UN Women Director, my biggest obsession was the creation of a male feminist movement. Because I thought that is what is missing in the fight against gender equality. And without them, and we are not going to be praising the men, obviously, for doing this work, because we don't want to praise fishes for swimming. This is a human responsibility. So I would not in any country put this just on government, but government has to create conditions where this fight can be fought successfully. But it's too big to leave it just to government. You need all of society to be part of this. On the issue of how do we...
How do you get people in positions of authority to understand the urgency of the situation?
I think Sangeza might tell us. Yeah, I mean, it is, having been in that position before myself, I don't know what is happening, that it has become really difficult to not hear and see what people are going through. I don't believe that everyone who is in government is indifferent to the situation, but we don't have enough people to actually get the attention of the government to be focused on these issues that we're talking about, and make sure that when they get up in the morning, this is all they think about. Because in any case, that is the job description.
So how do we build that momentum and sort of get that, majority movement? I mean, how did you guys do it in LA?
So around this piece, which I'm very proud to say now is part of my current job, and that is a deliberate and serious investment in youth leadership, developing youth for leadership, and creating the next generation of a wave of leadership that can't be silenced and has the ability to understand how to navigate power.
And going over 4 years,
Right.
it's important to focus on going over 4 years, which also suggests that we should not just be relying on politics, because these people come and go. I almost even think that the focus on party politics also can be a problem, because you have a designated enemy, rather than a designated problem that you will work on with whoever. I think having the ability to belong to a political party, but also the ability to work with everybody who has a solution, no matter what party they come from, is probably one of the biggest challenge.
Yeah, we've run out of time, so I'm going to just take like 2 more questions, I'm afraid. That's all I can do. I'll take one here and then one at the back, please. Just any of the people at the back.
I've
Yes.
got the microphone, so I guess that would be me.
Okay.
We've heard a lot about teacher training, but not really much about solutions. And I'd be interested to hear from you, John, some of the solutions and case studies around teacher training that Africa as a continent can adopt. And then maybe at the micro level, in terms of appropriateness, maybe from you, madam, about how we're also teaching female adults, because the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. And if they're having children, at least that's the first point. So what are we doing to be inclusive in teacher training at that level of the micro?
Okay, so I've been told we've run out of time, and in answering that last question, perhaps you can both leave us with maybe 3 things that we must sort of focus on or do based on your experience and in tackling the problem of education on the continent. So you answered that in wrap.
I think innovative models that are both with university and apart from university, that can be funded by both private and public sector. TFA is just but one example, but alternative routes to certification. And secondly, pathways starting in high school for people to have a career pathway through into teaching with complete forgiveness of any kind of student loan so that they come into the profession. That might be my thoughts on that I think have worked. 2 or 3 thoughts. One thought is just how sobering the comments were, but everywhere I go, there is hope and care. And this notion of a common problem versus a common enemy is just, I don't think I could underscore that enough. I think I want to advocate for the co-joining of private sector and philanthropy with public sector. Can't do it alone. And the others can't stay on the sidelines if we actually want these issues to take place. And supporting people when they stand up and are courageous and act on their convictions, rather than pointing and hoping that they make it. I think those are the 2 things I would leave us with.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I also think that, like John says, you need private sector, you need philanthropy, you need government to work together. It's never going to be something that one of the parties can do alone. It's too complicated and too difficult to do alone. And we need to find an entrenched status for these other social players like private sector. They must not come to help. They must be embedded in the system, because we're educating students a lot for jobs that will not exist, especially right now when we cannot tell what is going to happen. So we don't know what careers are going to be. All of the careers we have are probably getting irrelevant every day. So you need to be with those who are going to employ the people. And on the issue of gender, the norms are still a problem. They entrench the way women, girls and boys are treated. And I found that in countries where there's dominance in Africa, especially I found in Africa, dominance of traditional authority and religious authority, the discrimination against women is hardest to fight against. So parents have a critical role to start with this issue at home in order for the future.
Now I get to introduce Arturo. So I'm going to have the privilege of introducing Dr. Arturo Kondo, who is president of Earth University, an innovative global institution based in Costa Rica that prepares young leaders from across the world as change agents for advancing sustainable development and nature-positive food systems. He has also guided the launch of Earth Ventures, which is an initiative to launch new business with purpose that also contribute to long-term sustainability. He has served as president, as Dean of Innovation, as Dean of the Business School, and as Director of Latin America Center for Competitiveness and Sustainability. Dr. Turo has his doctorate in business strategy from Harvard, the oldest university in America, and is a member of the inaugural class of CALI, which is a Central American Leadership Initiative, and is a fellow Aspen Institute, along with myself and many in this room. Hermano, my beloved brother, please welcome to the stage, Dr. Arturo Kondo.
So much, John. It's working. Thank you. So let me share quickly let me start by sharing. Can we put the presentation up on the screen, please? I made a mess of this. Oh well.
What is happening in this world right now has been urgent since decades.
The classroom for our students is not a building. The classroom for our students is the forest, the fields.
I went to Earth University when I was 23. It gave me the tools to understand the life as a whole ecosystem. What you do have an impact somewhere to someone.
This is more than a university. This is a dream.
Earth University was founded to prepare a new model of higher education. It was established in Costa Rica at the end of the 80s as a way to counter the civil wars, poverty, social conflict that was generalized in the region. The idea was to prepare a professional that is technically sound with training in agricultural sciences, in food processing, in renewable energy, but that also has a mission of preparing communities with a sustainable way of doing everything.
We have 10 students for one professor. We go to the different countries where our candidates apply. We interview them, not once, but twice. And some of those students don't have the opportunity to go to their universities in their countries, but they are here.
We have 50% of our students on full scholarship, 30% of our students have financial support of some kind, and then about 20% can pay tuition. And so we bring a sample of society into campus. We put them together. We let them live as peers. They prepare fields, they plant, they grow, but also they sell products. They put together small companies while they're here.
Most of the universities, they are focusing on knowledge, the technical information, but we want our kids to go outside and not ask for a job, but create jobs.
Every student comes here with the aspiration to change something. So when they go out of Earth, our graduates go to try to change that thing that brought them here in the first place.
In Earth University, we open our minds, open our world. We take care of the environment, of the natural resources, about people, about culture.
When I came here, I don't know anything about agriculture, and now I am like, oh my God, there's too much knowledge, and I have 2 years more. When I graduate, I want to share that knowledge with all my community.
I want to become a food scientist, to know more about food wastage, food safety, and how we can have even distribution of food. There are so many people involved in building a sustainable future. Earth has given me that kind of consciousness.
There are a lot of countries where now people are suffering for hunger or they don't have water. So we need to know more about agriculture. I want to help my community have my own farm and be able to make a change, even if it's a little, but I want to make this change.
It's not that you graduate and you see you, farewell, bye-bye. They teach us how to be in a world, developing the world, but in balance with nature, respecting people. Everything comes from nature. Ecuador is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world. Conservating this, it's a good business for the world, for the entrepreneur, for the people.
Earth students have that DNA, that grassroots experience, human experience, that will forever mark their decisions and their policies. Policymakers around the world lack that. Many times they are in boardrooms or cabinet meetings, and they either forgot or never really understood what change means on the ground.
We prepare leaders, that they can go out and help the society to be a better society. That's what we are doing.
Earth University is hope. There are 400 students waiting to go out to the world to make the change.
Thank you for that. So I'll be brief, we're running out of time, but let me address a few issues. I don't need to tell you this, but I want to share with you, this is our north. This is our target, right? The need for food, safe food, healthy food for the world. There is hunger still. The need for poverty to be eradicated, yes, but when you see, it's highly connected with food production, which is the utmost irony, the utmost irony and the utmost injustice, right? I mean, most people who produce food are hungry in the world. Of course, the other thing is health more in general. You know, there are almost 1 billion people hungry in the world, but there is 3 to 4 billion people who don't have enough of a good diet. They may have enough calories a day, but not a good quality diet. And then finally, climate change, which is pushing us all, you know, into some urgency, right? If by the mid of this century we haven't turned our, you know, current path, we'll be in serious trouble, as we know. And food is a big contributor to that. Now, this is one thing that I want to leave you with. It's a scale of what needs to change. There are more than 600 million farms in the world. Of those, 570 million are small. And that means that they don't necessarily have the resources, the knowledge, the time, the money to invest in the changes we need to see in order to tackle climate change and to produce enough food for a growing population, right? In Africa, Africa is about 17% of the farms of the world, so the number is around 100 million. That's the scale. The question is, who is going to do that? You know, and when we add food from water, right, there's another 60 million small operations around aquaculture, fishing, etc. also need to change. About 2.5 billion people in this world, you know, their livelihoods come from this primary food production. Who's going to change that? I'm not going to go into the details, but in the big scheme of things, in the world, even in our countries, we talk about the policy, we talk about technology, we talk about many things, but we do not talk about who is going to get to those 100 million farms in Africa. It's 100 million. It's not a small number, you know, and we do have amazing examples. And Bruce, if you're around, I mean, you work with tens of thousands of farmers. We need 30, 100 times that, right, to reach what we need. And that scaling up and who is going to be working with that is not again addressed. You saw the video and you saw the main points, but let me highlight this about what we do and why what we do is different. And this is about education, about higher education. And it starts with a philosophy that is mine, but you know, I didn't found the university. I've been leading it for 7 years now. And that is that a university graduate we cannot afford as a society for a university grad to be just, quote unquote, just a professional. It better be a leader. If 20% of Latin Americans go to university, much less graduate, 10% of Africans go to university, they are this small part of our population. We're investing big resources, government resources, private resources, it's a big social investment. It better be for those who are going to change the reality for the better. It has to be for leaders. It cannot just, quote unquote, just be a professional. And this is how we do it. We're very small. We have 450 students or so. 50% of them are women for the past 6 years. That's not a small feat, honestly, in this world, in the world of agriculture and food production. You know, they come from about 40 countries, 88%. I said 50, 30, 20 in the video, that's our goal, but right now it's 88% with scholarships. 70% from rural areas, more than 80% go back to their countries and communities. The graph on the left is the thing, you know, so the left line, the left part of the graph is a typical, the traditional, you know, the knowledge part, which in itself is different because we're not organized by departments. Madam Chancellor, you get this, right? I mean, we don't have, if you go to agricultural school anywhere in the world, you won't find food processing because that's in another school. Or you wouldn't find the entrepreneurship part because that's in the business school. And you don't find the conservation part because that's in sustainability or the new schools that are being founded around the world. We have it all integrated, but that's only the knowledge part, right? Literally, they start companies when they're at Earth, right? I mean, we give them up to $5,000 in working capital. They have to pay back. It's not a gift. As in real life, there are very few gifts, right? And they have to, and most of them make some money and they keep the money they make, and some of them lose money, as in life, and in different proportions than life. But this is a big part of what they do. A big part of what they do is community work. Community work in Costa Rica, that is a middle income country. It's not the poorest country in Latin America, but still, it's a learning by doing experience that is critical in their thinking and in their work. Because again, many times we live at the knowledge level, and then how do you bring that into reality? It's a huge challenge that is not easy to tackle for anyone, much less for a recent graduate from university. And then finally, a big emphasis on their own development as leaders. Big investment, and it touches on everything. 20% of our students are from Africa, as is mentioned there. We have more than around 200 graduates now. The first 2 graduates graduated 20 years ago in 2003. Now it's 20%, and we want to keep it at that 20%, not let it go down. Why? Because this is a super unique mix, right? I mean, 80% Latin America, 20% Africa. You know, you don't find that anywhere else in the world, literally, right? And maybe other people won't care about that, but I think we should. Latin Americans and Africans, so I'll end with that in a second. So this is a quick overview of what the model is and why is it different. Where are our graduates? This is just a super quick side. I was with Norma in the morning on the phone, just called me last night because he knew I was going to be in the time zone, but he's in Rwanda, excuse me. And so these are 6 graduates. I just chose them because some of them are pursuing the book and because Norman and Snath are close. So Norman created a firm that is taking from farm to home in Rwanda right before the pandemic. Of course, with the closures, he grew a lot. He keeps growing. He buys from 10,000 farmers now in Rwanda and take that food to Kigali. And he's growing and growing. He also founded a foundation to support the farmers. And he put some of the profits into the foundation, but also he raises other funds, which is smart. Snath is a Zimbabwean woman. She graduated in 19. She got a cricket company back at Earth. That was his company, right? And now he's doing that. She works for Canfit too, but now she has this startup. It's called Jumping Protein, which is creative name. And what she does is she works with many women. And so she teaches them and finds funding for them. And so they start producing, and if she collects all that and makes it, you know, then they process it, make it into powders. This is high protein content, very sustainable way of producing high protein content for additional, you know, for supplements for the diets of everyone, including children, right? And then we have people like Fatuma. So Fatuma graduated in 2017. She did later a master's in the UK. She's now back in Uganda, and she started a Unyega farm, a farm that started with her family, with a restaurant, which in her village was unheard of. But there are people who need, you know, prepared food, and she's growing. That's smaller set, but she's growing. Snacks actually works with dozens of women, and that's growing at a different scale. So what we see is, and there are people in different places in government, in Kenya, in different private organizations in other parts. And these are just a sample, 6 of the 200. But the point is, they're already making change because their training was to be leaders, to be entrepreneurs. Social entrepreneurs, for-profit entrepreneurs, that's okay, whatever works, right? And I was talking to Francis, who I thought did a great job last night. We were talking on the way here on how I strongly believe that that's the future. More than a top-down, you know, let's plan for to solve this approach, more entrepreneurial approach on how we are going to, and they are going to get resources. To the point before, how do we get the resources from? Of course, we need from the government. Norman's foundation does get money from the Rwandan government, also from multilateral organizations, and also from other entrepreneurs or individuals. Let me tell you a couple of last things. One is, and John mentioned Earth Futures and Adventures. As a university, Earth Futures for us is our kind of an impact work, not only for the purpose of having impact, which is nice. It's really for learning, so that we can share those learning of how community actually works, and also for scaling up. So we have worked for communities for 30 plus years, for as long as the university has existed, but we put it together in 2018 to scale up. And so we're moving from working with hundreds, dozens of farmers to hundreds. This year we're going to break into thousands. We need to have a scalable models like Bruce's, like others who are, that can be used and can be replicated. And then adventures, which is our way, as John mentioned, to create businesses with purpose. And this is what we're thinking last year led us to. So for the next stage of the University 2050, where should we go? We're very small, but we think we have something to contribute in this model of education, okay? And so there's no way we can grow in any meaningful way, nor anyone can. We're working with UC Davis, a very well-known university around agriculture in the US. They have 40,000 students still. It's 600 million farms, right? So we need to work together. So size suddenly matters less, or is not as critical, your own size. What is critical is what connections can we make, what partnerships can we form. And what we're aspiring to do is to start with many, not on our own, a global movement of leaders, of those grassroots leaders that would actually change reality for primary food production. And of course, from then on, with a systemic way, the whole system. And not a minor thing, and this is the final thought, and with this I'll end, which is, why do we care? And this is even personal. I care because that arrow, that double-pointed arrow, is a missing link in this world. And I've been saying this for the past 20-some years. Africa and Latin America don't work together, don't talk too much, don't share too much. We have a huge heritage, African heritage in our culture for sure. That's why our music is nice and our food is tasteful. I'm not kidding. I'm absolutely not kidding. But we don't do much, and we should. We're complementary in some ways, very similar in others, and we should be doing more. And this is a beautiful example. So Snath, the person I mentioned, started a cricket company with five people in total, but with Jennifer, who works for us. And she's from Costa Rica, and they had the idea of the cricket. And, I had crickets before in Mexico, but, I bought stuff from them when they had the company. That was in 2017. And then, of course, Snat took that to Zimbabwe. And so only to say that kind of innovation comes from that cross everything. Innovation comes from diversity of all sorts. Gender, crucial for justice, also crucial for innovation. We're missing half our part of humanity in that innovation equation. So I'll end up with that, and I look forward to a conversation on what can we do more together.
Thank you, Arturo. A couple of questions. One is, could you talk to us a little bit about how you find your students from Africa for your program?
Thank you for that. So the first were kind of a fluke, right? Somebody found about the institution and said, African students would benefit from this. But from then on, we started having partnerships with institutions who already invest in youth in Africa. And so CAMFED is one. Howard Buffett has this foundation that has high schools for women, for young women in Rwanda. Because our admission process is very unique. For the last class, 105 entered this year. We had 1,600 applications. We filtered 800 of those, and those 800 we interviewed in person in 40 countries. And sounds silly, but the thing is, to your point, why is it that black students could not take advantage of the GI Bill? Because they were not admitted through the typical SAT types of course. They come from tough high schools. They are never going to ace an SAT test. But that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for leaders who can, of course, go through university, yes, but who have that other things. And so we're looking for those other things. So we interview them in groups, we interview them one by one, and they do have a math, especially a math test, so that we can place them. And the first year is designed to give them all the support because they won't have it. I mean, the people coming from rural areas won't have the same math skills, but that's how we go around.
Thank you. Would you talk just a little bit about, I was quite taken by the slide that had only 1/4 on the traditional skills. Talk a little bit about how do you develop leadership in your students that goes beyond the technical knowledge?
So one of our core philosophies is learning by doing. And I believe, and we believe, that leadership goes like that, by doing. And so, for instance, community projects, they go into communities every Wednesday afternoon, so for 4 years. In the first and second years, they're part of teams. We work with communities for about 7 years, so these are part of a multi-year, dimensional project with communities. And they start by working in teams. And then in the fourth year, they actually are leaders of those teams, working with the younger colleagues and with the community. And so starting with the first year when they start working in the community, it's not only agriculture they do, right? I mean, they work with women to create a cooperative. They work with the local government because sometimes they are not organized. They work with institutions in Costa Rica to get resources. That kind of, how do we get the funding for the X or for Y or for Z? And so that's a process in which they develop leadership. And then internally, we make them work in groups. We assign them arbitrarily, and they go like, "Oh, can we choose?" No, because in life, you won't always choose who you work with, right? You go into the Ministry of X or to the Department of Y or the company Z, and those are the people you will be working with. You need to learn to work with everyone. And so that's a kind of in practice, training they get in the 4 years.
Thank you. So your organization is like any other organization. It sits inside of a country. Could you talk a little bit about how you've navigated your relationship with government?
That is interesting. Well, we're not funded by the Costa Rican government. The first government that funded us was the U.S. government. USAID was a big contributor at the first years, and then other foundations since then. We are one of 4 international universities in Costa Rica. I led another one. I was there for 20 years. Led the last 10. We're kind of beacons of what Costa Rica can contribute to the world, I think. And so we have a very, very functional relationship. At Earth, we have an extra thing because we work in these rural areas. And so we are a great partner for government. Not all administrations see it the same way, but in general, they can appreciate that this is an extra kind of pair of hands that with the Ministry of Agriculture or the Ministry of Interior Development, can actually speed things up. Especially, we're in Limon, in the Caribbean side of Costa Rica. Come visit. Costa Rica is a very nice country to visit for sure. Earth is a very interesting institution to visit. You meet our students and you fall in love. That's what happened to me. But this is a part with more poverty in Costa Rica, with more violence in Costa Rica, in part because it's touched by the flow of drugs towards the U.S., from Colombia and South America towards the U.S. and to the Caribbean. And so, for the government, we're good partners. And I think one thing our students get is that Costa Rica is an interesting, I'm not Costa Rican, so I speak with some objectivity, and it has things that we can learn from. I mean, it's a country that has made, courageous decisions over the years. They dissolved the army in 1948. In 1950, they set a target for 2000 to have 100% renewable energy as in their electricity matrix, which is very, visionary. And so on. So the investment in education, they see it as that. The money they were not investing in the army were investing in education. And so they get that too. And so the government is a big ally of what we do.
I loved your moonshot piece for 2050. Do you ever consider the possibility of incubating your model in other countries as part of this?
Yes. The short answer is yes. And before last year, we had received at least 3, I've had at least 3 serious conversations, one from a McKinsey partner in Kenya, another one from this friend in India, and another one from South America, saying, can we replicate this? There are 2 replications already, one in Rwanda. RICA, the Rwandan Institute for Conservation and Agriculture, is an actual replication of Earth, but it's just Rwandan. It's not cross country. And another in Colombia. It's a university called Utopia. But now we're more intentional. So the short answer is yes, and I think the world needs more of the model, more than just ourselves. Yeah.
Last question I'll ask you, and then we'll have an opportunity for our colleagues in the audience. Would you just, like we had in the last panel, talk a little bit about the opportunity and role for private sector in your work versus government?
Absolutely. So the first kind of obvious, and we're taking advantage of that, and let me introduce Naboth Wambale. Where are you, Naboth? I saw you. Yeah, well, I hope you can see him. Naboth is the head of our fellowship program. It's based in Africa. The program is based in Africa. He's Ugandan, based in Uganda. And so that's the first, right? I mean, which is private sector should take advantage of this profile of leaders to further not just their businesses, but their impact, the work they do, right? And what we're doing with the fellowship is that we're placing our recent graduates in companies or incubators. Half of them are entrepreneurs or incubators, government agencies sometimes, universities sometimes, so that they can take a path towards impact. They come from rural communities where, when I joined, a female graduate from Uganda told me, look, I came to the Earth, came back to, sounds like aliens, but no, came to the Earth University, came back to Uganda, and I had all these ideas, but went back to my village, and I didn't know anyone who had land, who had money. I didn't know where to start. She was disconnected of her own society, right? And so what the fellowship is doing is creating those connections faster than it would take otherwise. So that's the first. But the second really is the investments we can make, because this is the future of food. We spend a lot of money in food. Our, of course, livelihood depends on food. So private sector should act, and not only food producers are involved, logistics are involved, many things that retail are involved. So I think the private sector should look at this with a different eye, with an investment eye, and should be investing in these type of leaders who we need at scale in the world, not just Earth, again, many, so that we can change reality for the better.
Thank you so much. I secretly wanted to be a talk show host, but I've gotten the signal that I must stop because Delhi gave me the non-too subtle.
All right.
Like my career is over at the moment. So I wanna close by really thanking you. Muchas gracias for everything that you have done, and let's give our tour around.
Can I add just one quick thing? Our secret weapon is that Delhi is in our board. I'm an FOD, which is usually called the FOD Summit, and that would work. But it's our secret weapon. And I'm here the week, and I think we should do more. Again, Africa, Latin America.
Thank you.
Please enjoy a quick 15-minute refreshment break, some refreshments in the foyer and also on the patio outside. See you back in 15